Released in 3 separate chapters between mid-2017 and early 2018, Secrets of the Maw is a DLC package for Little Nightmares, a puzzle platformer horror game developed by Tarsier Studios. In Secrets of the Maw, the player takes control of a new character called the Runaway Kid, as he, like Six, the main character from the first game, attempts to escape the mysterious, disturbing, ocean-dwelling establishment that is the Maw. The following video observes my personal experience playing the DLC, along with a subjective critique of it and how it stacks up to the original Little Nightmares, as well as whether or not it fixes some of the issues I had with the base game. Although I will make the occasional observation on the story, its themes, and how its characters are connected, this is not a theory video. There are plenty of those out there by people who are far better at that kind of thing, who know far more about this universe than me. As I said, this is a critique, first and foremost. Also, each chapter in Secrets of the Maw is about an hour long, and so there isn't much room to talk about things if I don't spoil the DLC. So you've been warned. This video will contain spoilers as I recap Secrets of the Maw and my journey through it. The Depths is the first chapter in Secrets of the Maw, and it was by far the most terrifying for me. After following another child trying to escape the nursery, which we saw in the original game, the runaway kid stumbles through a long tube, sending him far down into the lower sections of the Maw, where he finds the torch belonging to the other escapee, along with lots and lots of water. This part of the Maw is dangerously flooded. However, something else has made this place its home. Perhaps another member of the Maw's grotesque family tree. This thing is called the Granny, and it's your goal to lead the runaway kid across these large expanses of foggy water, while evading the small tread the Granny leaves on the surface. If you see her gnarled, gangly hand, it's probably already too late. These are the best monsters, in my opinion. The kind you don't see, but instead catch glimpses of out of the corner of your eye. Your brain starts speculating and imagines the worst possible thing. Every so often when entering a new room, you see the Granny lurking above the water for a second, before she dashes back to the comfort below the surface. It is truly unsettling, and just made me want to run back the way I came, so the janitor could have me. From a gameplay perspective, this chapter plays like an extended version of the shoes scene from the original game, except with one small but very important addition that dials things up to 11. So in order to escape the Granny while swimming, you have to climb onto these various floating objects, the same as you did before with the briefcases amongst the shoes. Only this time, if you wait too long, the Granny lunges from below at whatever it is you're standing on, sending you sprawling in the air and off of your temporarily safe island. I lost my shit the first time this happened, and it definitely kept me on my toes, even if it did take me so off guard the first few times that I ended up being nabbed by the Granny afterwards, and that felt a little bit unfair. So, as good as all of this stuff is, having not played Little Nightmares in quite a while, one thing which immediately struck me upon starting the first DLC was just how difficult it can still be to control your character in this game. With the Depths, I found myself dying and repeating sections constantly, and although it was still the scariest chapter in Secrets of the Maw overall, my inability to get good quickly made things less scary than, they could have been. I got used to the Granny. Every time she caught me, it became less and less bad to be caught. and just more and more frustrating. Ultimately, the game can become an awkward grind at times, as you just want to progress past the place you're stuck in and see what's around the next corner. I mean, it didn't take too long for me to refamiliarize myself with the unusual button layout. However, what is still a fundamental issue with the game is just the overall game feel. Your movement is largely tied to animations and physics in Little Nightmares, so it's not very responsive. At the worst of times, Secrets of the Maw still devolves into a game of trial and error, as you battle with your own character. Throughout all of these extra chapters, I felt there were moments where I had to die at least once, either to figure out what had to be done to proceed, which is an entirely separate issue, or I had to play the same section over and over again until I just got lucky evading a monster by somehow maneuvering the runaway kid away from it in a very specific and precise manner. Combine this with the constantly shifting 2.5D camera perspective that seems to rock with the ocean, and depth becomes an increasingly difficult thing to judge, sending me walking straight past my desired location, into walls, or in a zigzag as my thumb vibrated along with the analog stick, trying to keep the runaway kid walking in a straight line. Now, I understand it's very unreasonable to assume these issues would have been addressed in the DLC. Tarsier is a relatively small studio with a limited budget, and character control is such a fundamental part of a game's level design. You know, the way it scales things, and just generally the way the engine calculates interactions with your character and everything else in the world. So reworking all this would have been an extremely difficult challenge to overcome. Furthermore, considering so many fans appear to enjoy the game regardless, as well as the fact that DLC generally needs to come out fairly soon after release if it is to maintain interest in the game, it wouldn't have been worth dedicating the resources and time to all of this. All I hope is that all this stuff is ironed out if we ever get a sequel to Little Nightmares. I mean, the way the character controls is where a game like this derives most of its challenge from. It uses the slight disconnect to add tension, and it works, but it's not exactly ideal to me. I can't think of how else you'd fix it here, and you know, they're definitely aware of this, and I'd hazard a guess that it's just something that has to be, you know, tweaked and finessed constantly to get right in any game, and I'm sure that's what they did here. So considering all that, it is remarkable that the game controls as well as it does, while looking as good as it does in motion. The sense of weight to your tiny character in this massive world, and you know, all the objects you interact with, looks and feels very accurate, along with the many detailed character animations associated with those interactions. Again, as with the original game, this sense of detail extends to every grungy, rustic environment in Secrets of the Maw, and every accompanying sound effect and ominous musical cue and backing track to create a truly haunting atmosphere. I loved coming back and seeing the deformed and somewhat impractical designs of the furniture and other set dressing that just isn't quite right in comparison to their real-world counterparts. My favorite bit of environmental storytelling is in this first chapter, where upon draining a section of water, I noticed bits of furniture secured to the floor so that they wouldn't float up to the surface, indicating that the granny likes to live under water just like those living above it. Secrets of the Maw reminded me how strong this game is, not just with regards to its aesthetics, but also from a graphical perspective. I love the misty depth of field effects and, you know, other camera tricks, along with the lighting and shadows, the subtle film grain, etc. The production values on this unusual little game are just insane. Anyway, so after pushing a TV into the water and electrocuting the granny, the runaway kid is captured by the janitor. The screen fades to black, and it is revealed that the kid was caged alongside Six early on in the original game. For the most part, Secrets of the Maw is entirely separate to the original game and doesn't answer some of the bigger questions I had after finishing Little Nightmares, but I still love how these bits of DLC were made to take place during Six's adventure, succeeding in offering a different perspective on it and the various events taking place in the background. The next chapter of Secrets of the Maw, suitably titled The Hideaway, begins with the runaway kid inside a body bag, being transported on one of those meat hook rails. It's implied that the janitor wrapped up the kid like the others from the original game. It's freaky to think that some of these guys are actually wrapped up alive. For some reason, that didn't occur to me before. Maybe they're sedated or asleep or something, I don't know. Anyway, somehow the kid tears through the bag and tumbles down onto a pile of coal, where he wakes to find a bunch of gnomes scuttling about. Yeah, the gnomes are a huge focus of this chapter, and as a result, this is my favorite part of the entire Little Nightmares package so far, but I'm getting ahead of myself. These final two chapters embrace a slightly different approach to level design than most of the rest of the game, because they contain a fairly substantial hub world that may not necessarily be larger than the sections of the Maw you explore in any of the other chapters, but which is laid out in such a way that felt more organic to me. If you've played the original game, think of a more expansive version of that one kitchen scene. So generally in Little Nightmares, you make your way from one side of the screen to the other, and through a series of fortunate and unfortunate events, somehow you reach where you need to go. Here, you're given a goal and basically are free to explore in whichever direction you please, which is a refreshing approach. Technically, you're just picking between one of two directions at first, up and to the right, which branch off from the main hub room, but the fact that they don't specify which path to take from the start overall gives the impression that the world is bigger and less like it was designed just for you to make your way through. For some reason, they still find a way to lock you in a zone so that you can't leave without completing its particular challenge, presumably to provide more direction and encouragement. But the layouts loop around so that you're still making your way to and from the hub world, and it seems less like you're moving along one linear pre-designed path, as I said, even though technically you still are in a way. So the whole point of the Hideaway DLC is to befriend enough gnomes to help you fill a coal engine to power this mechanism that you should be able to hitch a ride on and out of this place. Each of those zones I mentioned houses a couple gnomes, and they'll also help you get out of the particular zone they belong to, and then accompany you to the hub room where the engine is located. This process is absolutely adorable, while also making me feel a little guilty, because often you have to run after and catch these guys, like any other monster would when seeing you. However, afterwards, you give them a big, reassuring hug that gets me in the feels every time. They then attempt to follow your every command, jumping when you jump, pushing when you push, grabbing onto handles when thrown onto them, and eventually working the engine for you as you leave them behind on your selfish quest to hopefully greener pastures. Okay, it sounds a little more twisted when you put it that way than how it is actually presented. I got the impression it's supposed to be more of a I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of thing, except all the gnomes want in return is a little bit of love. The kind of love they didn't get in their previous lives. The final DLC does show why they'd be so eager to help a child trying to escape the maw, but more on that later. On a side note, I love how sometimes they forget they're supposed to be helping or following you and just stand there oblivious, waiting for you to come and fetch them. It's kind of like the interaction between Trico and the boy in The Last Guardian, where he didn't respond instantly to your calls, which made him feel more alive, like he was an independent thinker and not something that was programmed. Unlike that game, I'm not sure if it was intentional here or just, I don't know, an AI glitch of some sort, but nonetheless, I love the effect. The gnomes are just so damn innocent and cute, largely due to their character design and, emphasized by their brilliantly animated body language that's just so twitchy and energetic with every motion. This DLC emphasizes something I really appreciate about Little Nightmares. The puzzles may not be the most unique or challenging, and thus not the most satisfying to solve, but they do appear plausible and consistent within the world that has been created. In other words, the design is so well disguised that you can forget the level was made by someone, while you're still directed in small subconscious ways, usually with light and shadow. That makes things even more scary, because you get the sense that none of this is actually about you, and that means you're expendable. It's a similar effect to what I described about the hub world approach to this chapter. So, after firing up the engine and hitching a ride upwards in the maw, you come across a small hideout where a group of gnomes have gathered around a furnace, staring into the dim light while a melancholic track plays in the background. You can just quickly make your way past all of this and ignore it if you want, though I couldn't help but stop and stare into the light with them, taking this brief moment to reflect on my journey and how oppressive this world can be. As cheesy as this sounds, it sort of transcended the game world for me, actually. And it was like I just let myself stop, in the game and in reality, breathing away the tension of the day, along with the critical mindset I was approaching the game with, just for a moment. This was really unexpectedly powerful and beautiful stuff, and it just reminded me of how effective video games, like all great art, can be at getting you to empathize and confront things even when you least expect it. You're not told to stay here, you're not told to sit here, and yet I did. It was just kind of nice. I don't know. Anyway, the chapter ends with you stumbling onto the top of a lift, which turns out to be transporting none other than the lady, that freaky chick from the original game who presumably runs the maw. This is where the Hideaway ends and the final chapter, titled The Residence, begins. You wake up sometime after the lady has exited the lift, before climbing out of the frying pan that is the shaft and into the fire that is the residence, finding her around the next corner in front of another one of those cracked mirrors she tends to surround herself with. A reminder of the themes of vanity which surround this particular character, where she's so afraid to look into a mirror or take off her mask that eventually Six uses that as a weapon against her. But I don't think these ideas are explored to much greater a degree later in the chapter, other than by further showcasing the overly extravagant design of her home, along with the overflowing decor plastering its surfaces. You notice a key on a pillow beside her, which you'll be needing later, as you sneak on past and into a massive chamber housing a large staircase amidst a sea of books, furniture, and other extravagant decorations. This is another hub world, with 3 levels to the chamber, each leading to a puzzle, which in turn provides you with an item required to progress. In this case, you need to find 3 statues and place them on these tiles with the corresponding base shape, and Remember what I said I loved about the puzzle design in Little Nightmares? The idea that they're usually quite well contextualized within the world? Yeah, they threw that out the window for most of this chapter, and instead crammed in some really bland video gamey puzzles that you could see anywhere, while simultaneously obscuring some of them to the point where I had to look up a walkthrough for assistance. I suppose it makes sense for the lady to have the resources and the paranoia to design and construct such a complicated system so that intruders wouldn't be able to infiltrate her home, but it just comes across as a disappointing approach to me, especially considering what they did with the last chapter. The first half of The Residence felt like filler to me, unlike the second chapter, which was similarly slow, but in which I generally felt like I was making some kind of progress. My goal felt practical. I knew what the point was of powering the engine, whereas here, it mostly feels aimless from the start. Later on, the little spooky figures who you've been catching glimpses of throughout the level start sneaking up on you, and you have to dissolve them with your flashlight, Alan Wake style. Once again, the controls and perspective get in the way, and aiming your flashlight properly can be a bit tricky at first. I suppose these guys are a serviceable addition to the game, and they do shake things up a bit in the sense that you can kill them from the get-go, like you would an enemy in a shooting game, except this time you're using light instead of bullets, which makes the situation feel a bit more volatile than, if you had a gun. Outside of scripted moments where you get the upper hand on a monster, you almost always feel defenseless in Little Nightmares, and that's supposed to add to the intensity. Whether intentional or not, this does help give the chapter more of a climactic sensation towards its conclusion that was lacking from the start. When you finally have some kind of power over your tormentors, but only during the final stretch towards the finish line, before that assurance gets snatched away again by the lady. Eventually, you find all the statues and place them on their corresponding tiles, opening a door leading to the lady standing in front of another mirror, this one intact. For the first time, we see her for who she is behind the mask, or at least how she and the kid perceive her. She notices you attempting to move past, and seemingly startled that someone has discovered her secret, she lets out a blood-curdling scream and disappears momentarily, dimming the lights and shattering the mirror in the process. The next few moments are spent darting through hallways and rooms stacked with those dreadful mannequins while the lady torments you. This isn't new or original, but it's so effective at generating anxiety. You don't know which one is really the lady. She could strike at any moment, so each of your steps is a careful one in spite of the speed with which you're encouraged to make them. Mannequins fall, disconcerting noises abound, and new exits reveal themselves. You're in her domain now, and she's playing with you. These are good jump scares, used sparingly and only at the end when the tension is at its absolute peak. And then it happens. Suddenly you're frozen, and that petrifying porcelain mask emerges from the shadows. The runaway kid, helpless, is hoisted into the air as a magical black fog immerses him. So, the gnomes are the children, or at least they weren't always gnomes. This may help explain why they're so eager to assist you after just one hug. They couldn't make it out of the moor, but they can help their friends. This is why an entire chapter was dedicated to you forming a deeper relationship with them, so you can properly empathize with this entire situation. The story of the kid and the gnomes isn't over yet, though. It's unclear whether or not he's immediately aware of how much this transformation inhibits him, and eventually he makes his way down to where the guests are feasting. With the same sense of determination and desperation that, as the player, you're responsible for providing him with. This reveal hit me like a freight train. The intensity of the music, the animation showing the gnome stopping to observe his surroundings, perhaps still pushing and attempting to formulate his next plan, but then pacing slowly during a moment of realization. There is no next plan. It's over. And then he stops at the sausage. And he stays there. As the player, we know that this is the same sausage he will later offer to Six during her moment of hunger, before she accidentally bites into the gnome and kills him. The scene fades to black and the credits roll before we pan out of a TV screen that then cuts to a grainy image of the hanging man, who you briefly walk past at the very beginning of Six's adventure, implying a sequel is underway that finally explains his role within this whole mess. Holy crap. As boring as the first half of this chapter was, the finale was absolutely able to redeem it for me. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. So, aside from the fact that it's already been examined quite well by other people, one other reason I've been so hesitant to make observations about how everything is connected in Secrets of the Maw and in the main game, from a character, plot, thematic and symbolic perspective, is because I'm still not entirely convinced there is actually a huge significance to certain things we've seen in this game, at least so far. Don't get me wrong, now more than ever, I'm positive that the lore has, in fact, been very well established by the developers, and there are obviously deeper themes they are attempting to explore, but perhaps not to the extent to which some theorists have proposed, or just not in that same direction. That being said, some evidence from those theorists is very difficult to refute, such as the fact that all the mirrors in the residence are smashed, and how that has something to do with vanity and the futility of continuously valuing external beauty and wealth over all else, ignoring the byproduct that is the monster growing inside. However, a lot of the information we're provided with is still so vague that many other theories could be true or false. I do like to keep guessing and speculating. That is a fun and compelling process, but I don't want to praise something like this just because it is so mysterious and difficult to interpret, and I don't want to condemn it for the same reasons. However, I will always praise the fact that the developers want you to make your own deductions. They definitely respect their player base and the notion of show, don't tell. There are things Secrets of the Maw in particular definitely clarifies, like what the gnomes are, for example. But as to whether or not that contains any cultural or religious references, I just don't know for sure. from what I've observed, the DLC doesn't answer that many questions, and that could be because there aren't actually concrete answers, or they simply have yet to be revealed in a sequel. As such, Secrets of the Maw may disappoint some in that regard. For now, personally, I'm gonna continue assuming that Little Nightmares isn't necessarily trying to make a huge statement about anything specific, and that its primary purpose is simply to be a horror game with interesting and terrifying characters, disturbing imagery, and a beautifully haunting and uniquely atmospheric world. And that isn't a bad thing, by any means. Overall, I had such a good time with Secrets of the Maw, and I'm keen to go back in and collect all the bottles of Flotsam that I missed. Even though it doesn't fix many issues with Little Nightmares from a technical perspective, and only answers some questions posed in the original game, it does tell a worthwhile story about the runaway kid and his tragic journey through the Maw alongside 6 that I'm very glad I didn't skip out on. Although not perfect, Secrets of the Maw cements Tarsier Studios as one of the more imaginative game developers working today, with Little Nightmares standing out in a sea of games with repetitive motifs, horror and otherwise. So what do you guys think of Secrets of the Maw and my critique of it? More importantly, how about that final reveal? Did it impact you in a similar way it did me? What would you have liked to see happen in this story or in a future story set in the Little Nightmares universe? Although I haven't proposed many theories surrounding Secrets of the Maw and how all the characters, events and themes are connected, I'd be interested to hear your speculations about what all this means in the grand scheme of things, if it does in fact mean anything. I really appreciate you watching the video, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.